Hello. Thank you for joining our presentation today, Corporations and Foundations, the second floor of the House of Development. And especially thank you to everyone for putting up with our timing snafu. We are getting started about half an hour late, but we will be making everything available later. So if anyone has to duck out early, we totally understand. So thank you for sticking around. Just to give you the background on the House of Development, it is a concept developed by Cogio to illustrate the building blocks of a successful organization and explain why development is so crucial to fundraising, recruiting, and achieving your organization's goals. Before we dive too far in, some housekeeping things. We'll be taking questions at the end, but if you're on desktop, you can submit questions through the chat option on the GoToWebinar interface. People who dialed in will not be able to submit questions, but you are more than welcome to contact us after the presentation. My name is Jen Wells, and I'm the Creative Director at TAP Network. I will be speaking to a few slides on the marketing and technology side near the end of the presentation. And right now, I'm going to introduce you to our main speaker, Rob Kusel, the Managing Director of Cogio. Rob's organizational advice and development services to nonprofits offers organizational advice and development services to nonprofits to optimize their efficiency and long-term sustainability. Rob has worked with organizations such as Essex and Drake Fundraising Council, Blue Oak School, Stanford University, and his own alma mater, Williams College. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Rob.
Thanks, Jen. So let's move right to slide number 3, which you'll know we're smack in the middle of the 10 presentations, and we're moving up to the second floor, which is non-retail. So the first floor, annual giving, membership giving, and events, special events, signature events, you might remember, most of that funding goes to unrestricted, to operations. The second floor, we're going to deal more with potentially restricted funding. So today, corporations and foundations in great detail. The next slide, again, visually demonstrates the upward flow within the House of Development, because as we'll be discussing today, many of the corporate and foundation relationships stem from previous relationships established in both annual membership giving and events. The only downflow that occurs are corporations sponsoring events, and really that is the only downflow from the second floor down to the first floor. Otherwise, the House of Development always works up, beginning with the PR, into the retail, and now into a little more sophisticated in terms of dealing with approaches to corporations and foundations, where decision-making isn't one person in many instances. The next slide, 3 main goals for today. First, understanding what foundation outreach and corporate engagement are and how they add to short-term success and long-term, in particular, organizational sustainability. 2, why activity in both areas are fueled by the lower floors of the smart home, as I described. And 3, understanding the role of technology in corporate and foundation engagement strategy. And as Jen mentioned, the last, I think, 6 slides will be devoted to that. Next slide. Some of you may have seen this from the last presentation, but it's a breakdown of contributions by sources. And again, there are really 3 major sources of funding. The first, individuals, which represents the great majority, nearly 3/4, over 2/3 of all funding. Next are foundations at 16%, followed by bequests at 9%, and then corporations at 5%. So the takeaway here is that foundation giving at 3 times more than corporate. So spending time on foundation activity, grant writing can be beneficial. However, there is obviously good funding in corporate as well that can be of interest. The next slide. So what types of foundation and corporations are of interest to you as an agency? In terms of foundations, they're really four general types. One, very well known, which is the private non-operating foundation, which again, it could be shut down for whatever reason. Donor advised funds, those generally are within community foundations, or they reside in other venues. And obviously private operating foundations, which some operate programs as well as awarding grants. So you have to understand what the functionality of the operating foundation might be. And then community foundations. Most every area has a local community foundation whose sole role is to support the 501c3 market in that general community. Corporations, as far as we're concerned, there are really two types, even though there are four types, but two makeups of corporations in terms of how do you deal with them. The C Corps are larger corporations. This is where dividends are paid out to shareholders. And so generally, outreach to those corporations is more complex. Think of Target, think of the banks with the Community Reinvestment Act, where a percentage of their profits have to be reinvested in the 501c3 sector. Think of the healthcare industry. It's never just asking straight up. There are always processes and, et cetera. On the other hand, S Corps, LLC, LLPs, and sole proprietorships are easier, only because it's generally one individual, two individuals, or if it's a partnership, LLP, several individuals making the decision. And we'll talk later about logical approaches to those two types overall companies. The next slide. How do they contribute generally? Again, this is general. There are other ways as well, but these we find are the most general types of contribution. For foundations, it's really two areas in general. One is programmatic, right, where they support only programs and operations. Generally, and these generally are mutually exclusive, we find, in terms of how foundations operate, in terms of their willingness to support. The other being capacity building in terms of capital. We don't find many foundations building endowments other than their own corpus. That's not usual, although it does happen. We've seen it at Stanford University and other larger entities. But in general, it's really just let's build something together or let's support programs. And then the third, rare, but it happens, is in-kind giving, where foundation, their focus is repurposing materials, etc. So there are all sorts of in-kind foundations. We see a lot of food repurposing around the country, particularly in large cities, where they're partnering with restaurants and making sure that the food that can be salvaged can be repurposed. And there are many other ways. But those are the three principal areas for foundations. Corporate, a little broader. They do support programs. And again, this because it's individuals making decisions. So it's generally whatever their affinity might be within your agency, if in fact they have affinity for your agency and the work you're doing in the community. They do support capacity building, names on 501c3s, corporate, we see that. In-kind is big, obviously. There's a lot of capacity there in terms of manufacturing, in terms of services, in terms of, just a lot. So if you're ever doing a build out, you need to really evaluate what can be done in kind. It's really critical to have one tab really that focuses solely on in-kind potential as it relates to whatever build out project. And obviously there are many examples of that. We all know employee matching program. We'll get a little more detail about that later. Employee volunteer. That's very important in terms of the entire Habitat for Humanity business model is based on corporate employee volunteers in terms of For example, the work Jimmy Carter and his crew in Atlanta are doing, that's all basically how they're running their 501c3 around the world. And then the last one we all know are sponsorships, corporate sponsorships. The next slide, ironically, both foundation and corporate engagement follow the same track in terms of what steps, 5 steps you need to take to really properly engage tactically and find the right synergies in both areas, both foundation and corporate engagement. So what are those 5 steps? First, research, mostly foundations, because corporations are going to be more about relationships and then synergies for return on investment for them. And then the research for foundation, good news, thanks to the internet, it's been increasingly easier. And then having access to the foundation center libraries in public libraries and all those databases in the 990s has made it very, very easy. Whereas 25 years ago, it was a real chore to get. There were essentially 2 foundation centers, one in New York and Manhattan, the other in San Francisco. And you had to physically travel there in order to get appropriate data. It was really tough. The second, you want to narrow down strategically by focus area and affinity, right? Because it can't just be throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping that it's going to match. You've got to make sure the synergies are there and that you're bringing the right proposal in the right area that's going to have the right affinity toward that agency supporting it, the foundation. And the same is true of corporate as well. Third, you want to have a final list of what you consider to be qualified foundation and corporate prospects, right? What does that mean? Well, if you're in a capital campaign, you're going to focus on those corporations that can do in kind, as well as potentially have naming rights. You're also going to focus on those area foundations who are known to support capital. On the other hand, if you're not in a capital campaign and you're really focused on programmatic, enhancing incremental revenues for your programs, then the focus will again shift to corporate support in that area, as well as finding foundations which do support programs. The fourth, you're going to engage high net worth individuals. And this again is the bottom-up approach. So who are those high net worth individuals? Well, they're from your individual giving and your events. And to do what? Well, to uncover possible existing personal connections with foundations and or corporations, right? And again, the ask is always, yes, well, will you invest in our company? But once you've had that conversation about investing in our 501c3, then the next question is, what are your connections to other high net worth individuals with affinity, as well as corporations, leaders of corporations, and foundations? Do you have any? And then 5, you, again, leveraging your CRM and other lists, you're prioritizing, strategizing, and engaging on a continuous basis with hopefully positive results. And by the way, stewardship of these entities is critical. And you know that because many foundations and corporate will want reports. Foundations increasingly are asking for reports in terms of, did you execute on what we agreed would be the right synergies for funding? And corporate will want ROI reports. So be ready to track and make sure that you're fulfilling their requirements as it relates to reporting so that you may acquire future funding. Because remember, foundations and corporations have budgets which they're required to dispense every year. Foundations in particular, banks as well, and others. So the next slide, again, is a reiteration of what we just discussed in terms of foundation outreach and best practices. So now, just a little more data here. Reminder to triangulate in through individual relationships. Once you've identified the foundation where you think there's synergies, first thing you'll want to do is get the list of their board of directors and vet it with anybody who's a VIP within your 501c3 community to see if there are relationships. So triangulate, make sure that you understand where the relationships are so that you can essentially shepherd a proposal in, and that is most effective. The second thing, in terms of best practices, is really communicate in the language of metrics and impact. It's a little different language. It's more business oriented, and it's not just the admin ratio that they're interested in. They really want transparency, governance, understanding leadership, as well as program effectiveness. And standardize them and measure year over year with longitudinal data as much as you can, as long as that's relevant in terms of performance and outcome, in terms of difference in your community. Third thing, research 990s. They're gold mines because you really get to understand application policies, which previous grant recipients and what level they were awarded in terms of the grants, better understand their endowment investment strategy in terms of how they're growing their corpus and what their payout is every year. And then, as I just mentioned, you can glean the list of board members and key stakeholders to vet within your key community of board members and other VIPs to see if you can triangulate. Next slide is a continuation. If in fact it's a larger foundation with program officers, make sure you're in touch with them. That's their job. Okay, their job is to vet 501c3s that are synergistic with their mission to see if a relationship, might be pertinent. So that's really important. And this is done only if you don't have another way in, right? Again, if you have a better relationship through a high net worth individual into a board member, start there. But if you don't, and they do have program officers, don't be shy. This is their job, particularly if you think the synergies are strong. Make sure you do a lot of discovery about the foundation, have a plan and goal, almost a script before making the first call or outreach. Try and shift a cold application from cold to warm, right? So if it's, again, the stewarding the program officer, be sure to try and understand what they're like as a person and how they want to interact with you so that you're most effective in terms of the interaction and the positive nature of the relationship. You also want to plan for a second in-depth discovery call, because if they're interested, that will generally occur, where the program person may bring in another person. And then if in fact you think that you're qualified, that there are good synergies, be sure that you're very active in terms of stewarding both the proposal pre-entry and then post-application to completion. Now, if they require a site visit, once you've been vetted and you become a finalist, there are best practices. The best we've seen literally is where the CEO or the head of school waits for the visitors in the parking lot and greets them there, totally enthusiastically. Why? Because it really demonstrates that they're really ready, versus just being late for the meeting and really not being passionate about the school. And we've got many anecdotes about what one client may have done in terms of a site visit, and another client may have done with the same foundation at a site visit, and the outcomes were drastically different, to the great surprise of one of the clients, until we found out that it was absolutely because of the site visit and what occurred at the site visit. And then again, if you've been awarded a grant, stewarding that is critical. So the moves that you're putting on individuals, you want to have the exact same moves on foundations in terms of partnerships. Okay, now let's talk about a case study for foundation outreach. This is the San Francisco Elite Soccer Academy, boys and girls elite players in the city, and they're pretty new. They started in 2014, and they right out of the gate they were committed to complete access socioeconomically, because they wanted to make sure they had the very best qualified young athletes from around the city in the various districts of the city performing for this academy. And so they launched with a very ambitious financial aid program to meet not just the membership fees, but as well as travel, equipment, and other dues. So that being said, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars on an annual basis. And so we help them build out a development program from the ground up and focused on the House of Development, right? Which also included foundation outreach. Now, you might remember if you attended any of the first few webinars, we talked about cultivation events as being a very effective medium to draw in new incremental donors and new interest in your agency. And a quick reminder, that's when somebody hosts an event at their home that's generally small, an hour and a half in the evening, storytelling, talking about what's happening currently within the agency and what difference it's making in the community, and that we would be following up with them afterwards to talk more specifically about how they might get involved, right? So there's no ask being made, but rather just very informative. And it's a great thing to do in terms of establishing a culture of development. So let's look at the case study of this particular client and how it was able to successfully secure a transformational gift from a foundation last year. So initially we did just like we do for all our high net worth wealth screening, and we uncovered, in fact, that there was quite a bit of wealth within the academy, within the parent base of the academy. No surprise there in San Francisco. We also created a series of cultivation events, and again, 10, 15, 20 parents, very engaging host, and then the leaders of the academy doing their speeches and answering any questions. Well, it turned out at one such event, a parent, a woman attended, and her commitment, it turns out she also had a family foundation whose commitment was socioeconomic justice in the Bay Area of California. And there she is, and she's hearing the story about what the academy is doing, and her daughter's having a magnificent experience playing on one of the teams. And so we did what we told them we would do at the cultivation event. We followed up with everybody, and we had a personal meeting with her. And it turned out she let us know that in fact her foundation was very large, and that she was very interested in the financial aid program. And could we please bring a proposal that would really help and solve most of the financial issues in terms of financial aid support for the Elite Academy in any given year. So we submitted a proposal for $625,000 over 5 years, and that was the request. And in December of 2018, so a year ago, nearly a year ago, they were awarded with a $500,000 5-year pledge, $100,000 a year for the next 5 years. So obviously the negotiation went well. She told us to aim high. We did. We got the commitment, and now guidance is being given in terms of post-grant stewardship. And what does that look like? Well, it's pretty simple, right? This is what the $100,000 did over the last 11 months. It allowed us to do this with X amount of players, et cetera. And really just, again, ROI demonstrating that her investment, or the foundation's investment in this case, was truly making a difference. And the other great thing, obviously, as you can imagine, you're probably thinking this through, is that because this was incremental revenue, they were able to then take some of the other funds that would have gone to this and then improve some of the other programs, such as paying their coaches more and other things. So truly a transformational gift that was organic and linked through the activities that have been talked about in the House of Development. The next slide. Now we're going to shift over to corporate matching, corporate programs, and talk about some corporate initiatives that we all know about. So matching programs. You should absolutely be aware of any of the companies where your donors are who match. So 65% of Fortune 500 companies offer matching gift programs. So if in fact your donor works for such a company, check it out. You should have, there's a list readily available online. Just click on 501c3 corporate matching companies, and voila, the list will pop up. Over 18 million people, individuals work for companies with matching gift programs. 84% say they're more likely to donate if the match is offered. That's substantial. And then 1 in 3 donors indicate they'd give a larger gift if matching is applied to their transaction. And I'll speak subjectively because Allison, my wife, works for a large such company, and they do match very generously, and it does impact how we think about our giving. So you should be absolutely active in terms of understanding and creating synergies around that, because don't assume that your donors know about their own corporate matching program. And so you need to, do you know, Donna, that your company does a 2-to-1 match up to $5,000? And again, do not assume. So spend some time, set up the framework if you don't already, and make sure you're active in terms of informing your donor base. So here, the next slide, let's look at best practices for corporate engagement. First off, know the difference between a sponsorship and donation, right? Or transaction to a 501c3, right? They're 2 different transactions. And really, here's the deal. Businesses, they'll know how they want to operate, right? You just need to give them opportunities, and they then will guide you in terms of what they will want to do, right? So be ready literally to talk about any range of issues with a business, whether it's in kind, whether it's a direct donation for tax write-off, particularly if they are not a C Corp, where they can benefit from that individual tax write-off, or a sponsorship if in fact they've got that corporate marketing expense that makes sense for them. Again, remember the difference in terms of corporations between the C Corp and the other 3, which again are much more approachable. Limit research time unless the opportunity is highly targeted, right? So, for example, we advise all of our sports clients to really focus on healthcare companies because we know there's synergies. It's been proven out, borne out in the industry, and it's just a fact. But there are other synergies, Meals on Wheels, focus on restaurants, right? Focus on anything that's, get a relationship with Safeway, which they have a huge relationship. And again, if you look at the food banks around the country, Feedmore here in Richmond, Virginia, big relationship with some of the larger grocery store, supermarket companies. So again, make sure you understand where the synergies are, given what your mission is. Again, like foundations, it's about, the third thing is it's about engaging through individual relationships. And they will communicate whom they're trying to reach, what their ROI goals are, and the kind of language that they would want to use as a partner. If you don't have a relationship you can market, you can find out if there's some community specialists who can help you access. The Chamber of Commerce is always a great venue to develop a relationship with that, because they invariably have that membership. The other would be to get in front in terms of public speaking, and I'm sure a lot of you have done this with the Lions Club and all the civic groups, because invariably, again, those are populated, their memberships are, and we instruct all of our clients who are in capital campaigns. That's one of our activities at all times, is to get in front of those audiences. And if in fact one of their key things is ROI, return on investment, make sure that you can demonstrate that, right? Because even if it's a soft return, right? Because their interest, unfortunately, for the most part, is their bottom line and the profit line. So be ready to do that. Some metrics include, how many people you have on email list that will get exposure to this. What's your traffic on the website? What are the demographics? Are they appealing to that particular corporation or business? If in fact you're looking at sponsorship, signage, demonstrate foot traffic, if in fact it's applicable again. And then Jen's definitely going to touch on this, which is social media, engagement, and demographics. How much reach do you have as a 501c in terms of all things social media. So those are the best practices. Okay, again, and so we're going to close, before we get into the digital, we're going to close out with a couple case studies, which, again, demonstrate. This is a phenomenal school in Phoenix, Arizona, a pre-K through 12 charter, and they're in a campaign now to renovate and augment on their campus. And so we've got some sponsorships here. A fixed $25,000 one-time naming right for the softball and baseball field main entrance, which gets a lot of foot traffic, and then we're going to do $500 a year for the softball and baseball field fencing, and then for the softball outfield, it's going to be $1,000 a year, and then for the scoreboard, also another $1,000 a year. Highly visible, highly attended. Next slide is interesting. This is a roller derby group out of Portland, Oregon, the Rose City Rollers. And this is their 2019 sponsorship form. And they're creative, right? Because what you've got here, let's go from the upper left, and then we'll go down, and then we'll go over. The upper left is, you pick your base, right? There are two base donors, the Grand Slam or the hip check, right? And the Grand Slam, you get an 8 by 3 foot banner, logo on the RCR sponsor page. And the hip check, you also get a logo, but it's only a 4 by 3 foot banner. And then below that, they show you all the dates where there'll be, they call them bouts, roller derby bouts. They're contests, right? And then in the middle, here you add, much like you might add stuff when you go to Chipotle, you're adding items, right? So for $1,500 a year, you get products sold at concession. So that might be relevant to beer companies or whatever, right? And then on down, one mention per game, best seats for $500, coupon distribution three times for 3 games, Facebook promo for 3 games, also $500. And then it goes down, some of them at $250, track bumper, which is signage really, another logo on season poster, 1,000 such posters. And then on the right side, there's a statement, why support Rose City Rollers? And then statistics, right? To the point we were just making earlier, which Jen is going to touch on heavily, which is, okay, what's our reach? 11,000 Instagram, 8,000 Twitter, 20,000 annual bout attendees, 41,000 Facebook likes, etc. And some demographics as well. The ages of the skaters, 300 plus, 1855, 300 plus, 7 to 18, and then over 800 dedicated volunteers. And then below that, the visual, right? Big crowds, a lot of action, highly effective, potpourri of opportunities for sponsors. So this is actually very good for an action-oriented 501c3. And they also say that over 3,000 total purchase, you'll unlock even more options. So it's a very interesting concept, and certainly we support it. The next slide and the final slide before I pass it on to Jen. This is local here, actually in Richmond, Virginia. This is the Richmond Strikers, which is a massive soccer club. And they've got a big relationship with Bon Secours, which is a hospital, your classic large urban hospital chain that's not national. Every large city has them. Sutter Health, right? And, well, you name it. We all know who they are. And so here the relationship is that their orthopedic division is actually on site at the various Striker facilities anytime that there's a large tournament where hundreds of players are competing. So it's a very deep relationship. It's a profound relationship that's been expanded. And then 2 years ago, we all know that October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so we approached them and said, hey, how about we equip all the travel players, the elite players, with pink socks during home games in October and away games so as to raise awareness about the issue. They thought it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, right? And so the 2 pictures you see here are just that. Generally, it's a Halloween-style uniform. The Strikers' colors are orange, black, and white. And you can see from the jersey, shorts, and training shirt. This is my son's kit, by the way, from last year. And then the pink socks, which completely stand out and are out of place. Generally, they'll wear black socks or orange socks. And then on the right is a picture that actually I took in late October during a tournament, where again, you can see here, these are actually two Richmond teams playing one another, elite teams playing. And again, they're wearing the pink socks. So true to the relationship, they're actually executing upon it. But now I'm going to pass it on to Jen, who's going to discuss all things digital.
Thanks, Rob. I actually was interested in the sports jerseys because I had a job for a while doing graphic design for football jerseys. So it's interesting to see what they did with the colors, and having the pink stand out is a really good idea. I am actually going to take us in a slightly different direction, and I'm going to talk about some general marketing concepts, and then I'm going to show how they tie in together with the things that Rob's been talking about. So starting with this slide, this is an example of the donor journey. There's the 3 main phases, and I talked about this a little bit last month, but I'm going to give you a recap. So awareness is when your audience is just becoming aware of their own need or of the problem in general. So the examples of this: person A wants to feel good about giving back. This is a person who wants to be philanthropic. They know that they want to help and they're not sure how. Versus person B, who has become aware that this is a problem. And an example of that is I met a nonprofit in Delaware, and I didn't realize that our homeless population was so big here. So that was something where it's just like, it hits you. You didn't realize that was a problem, and now that you're aware of it, okay, what next? Consideration is when your audience is starting to brainstorm possible solutions to that need or problem. So for person A, they already know that they want to give back in some way. So now they're looking at different causes, different ways to give back. Person B has become aware that there's a problem. So now they're trying to figure out, what are the ways that I can address this problem? Am I going to help with my time, with my talent, or treasure? Decision is when your audience is choosing a specific vendor or organization that solves the problem. So now that they've decided that they want to work on this particular problem and how they want to help, which organization are they going to work with? What specifically about your organization is going to draw them in? And then once they've chosen you, that's when they're going to start engaging with you, whether that's volunteering, donations, or some other way. In the next slide, this is the traditional marketing funnel. It's that same funnel, but these are some tactics that you can use in each stage. So in awareness, when you're casting kind of that broad net and you're just trying to get people to even see that your organization exists or that the problem that you address is a big widespread problem, you're using very general tactics like social media, SEO, ads, blogs. You're just trying to get the word out. And then in consideration, when you're getting more into the details, you're connecting with people individually. You're sending email, you're using infographics to give them more details about the problem. Maybe you're starting to collect their information with forms, landing pages, and things like that. And then in the decision phase, that's when you're really narrowing in on, here's our impact stats, our case studies, testimonials from people that we've helped. Next slide. This is our typical strategy that we use for creating digital marketing plans. And a lot of these elements are going to look pretty familiar to you because, like, number one, setting an objective. That is something you should do anytime you're trying to make a plan. What are your goals? Are they SMART goals? How are you going to know when you've succeeded at those goals? What are your metrics? Number two is defining your audience. And we'll talk about this more. I feel like Rob's already touched on this a little bit. But if you don't know who you're talking to, then how are you going to know how to approach them? How are you going to go in? Like, what's the plan? So you need to define that audience. And then from there, you're going to start building out your messaging. So your campaign calendar is going to be, what's the message we want to get out, and like, who are we sharing it with? And then how are we sharing it? Which leads right into the technology plan, which is the tools and tactics you're using to share that message. The last step is one of the ones that I think is the most important: testing and analyzing to make sure that the strategies you're using are the most impactful, so you can keep optimizing and improving. And then also measuring the impact of your organization. So the different things that you're doing, your different programs, what kind of impact does that have? And are you collecting that data and keeping track of it so that you can use it in further marketing efforts? And that's why this is a circle, because it kind of keeps going around. So next we're going to talk about applying those marketing strategies to this particular topic. So target audiences, we talk about personas in marketing, which is where you're taking kind of the general idea of that audience and you're personalizing it so that it feels like you're talking to a specific person. Like, what are the patterns? What are the general things that that person values and their demographics and things like that? Because you are going into these with a lot of like one-to-one connections, you can narrow it down even further because you're not generalizing what will this type of person be interested in. You can say, what will this person or this board of people care about? What are their values? And then once you have figured out what they care about, then you need to make sure that you're very clear on your organization and your mission, and you know how to frame it in a way that ties in with that person's values. Always remember to ask what's in it for them. Don't assume that they care about your mission just because it's for a good cause. They should, but there's a lot of causes to care about. And everyone values different things. So you have to frame it in a way that makes sense to them. I put show and tell in here because they're going to want to see the proof. And those are some of the things that we talked about in that funnel at the very bottom. So you can use that in your general marketing, but you're definitely going to use it here too. And that's your impact stats, your case studies, your testimonials, like the proof that your efforts are working and showing the impact that you have. And then the last thing I've got is to have a plan. So trying to show this organization, or not this organization, trying to show this person that when they give you money, that you know what to do with it. You can forecast your impact using metrics, dashboards, projections. A step-by-step plan is great, but having numbers really backs that up and shows that you know what you're doing. The next slide, I've got some technology and tools. So now that you've got some ideas for things that you want to do, okay, great, but how do I do it? So finance and reporting, this is going to be the dashboards that you use to show money coming in, money going out, what it's being used for, and how effectively it's being used. And I've got a couple of bullet points with tools, but there's so many out there. QuickBooks is great. Blackbaud has a financial tracking software, and I don't want to tell you those are the only two. There are so many. Donor relationship management. You want to make sure that you're tracking all of your contacts, not just your donors. And that's because you want to see who is interested in what content, which content is the most effective, and you want to streamline the way that you manage all of your content and to make sure that your mission and impact are showcased effectively. And so CRMs like HubSpot or DonorPerfect let you kind of tie everything together into one cohesive picture. Data collection, I feel like can sound a little bit intimidating, especially when you're talking about databases, but in reality, it can be something as simple as a spreadsheet or Google Sheets. We like Airtable, which is fancy Excel basically, because it offers a lot of different ways to collect and display data, and it integrates with other platforms. And I'm actually going to talk about Airtable a little bit more in my case study. So Delaware Changing Lives is a really great organization that we work with. They offer mindfulness trainings that work with nonprofit professionals and schools and veterans and so many other people on developing tools to manage stress, to manage anxiety, to even just like better cognitive decision making. It's the numbers are really impressive. And the numbers is why I wanted to talk about them, because they do such a great job keeping track of everything and organizing everything. So starting with this page here, the first thing you see when you go to Delaware Changing Lives website is their dashboard that has some of their impact stats. This isn't everything, not by a long shot, but this is the numbers they thought were the most important, and they frame it right on the homepage. On the back end, there is a whole workflow that connects a few different things together, and it starts with the form. So over on the right, that's our content form. So when they host one of these mindfulness trainings, the trainer can fill this out on their phone or on an iPad, and they put in the name of the training, their name, the trainer, how many people attended, and then based on what those people's profession is, how many lives are expected to be impacted. So if it's 40 teachers and then each teacher has a certain number of students, you multiply those numbers together, and that's the number of lives impacted. So every time they have a training, they're collecting that data and they're putting it into a spreadsheet to make sure that they know what the actual training numbers are, but then also the overall impact in Delaware or as they grow around the world. And the best part, well, maybe not the best part, the numbers are pretty amazing all on their own, but one thing that excites me is the automation behind it all. So things are going from that form directly into the spreadsheet, which eliminates a lot of manual entry time. And then from there, it can automatically get updated on the website as well. So everything is connected, everything's working together, and you collect data in one place and then you showcase it somewhere else so that it's telling one cohesive picture. The next slide is just elaborating a little bit more on some other things that they do with this data. So this is a slide from their, I guess I'm going to call it a pitch deck, and they take their impact stats that they have from the work they've already done, and then they projected it out for the next 5 years. So based on the numbers of what they've already accomplished, here's what we think we can do with extra funding or extra time. And then this is like a really effective way to show people, where your dollars will go if you donate to us.
Claire here.
So anyway, so yes, those reports are what they use to pitch. And then we can also use those numbers in content campaigns, including social media, blogs, and so on. And over on the right, I've got examples of social media posts, which share more information from the trainings and photos from the trainings. The reason that this is important, when you're sitting in the meeting with someone who's deciding whether or not to give you money, they're not necessarily going to be like flipping through Twitter and seeing what you're doing there, but there's a very good chance they're going to go check out your website. They're going to read more about you. They want to know that you can do what you say you can do. And the stronger your brand is, the more your message is represented across different mediums, the more professional you're going to look, the more you're going to give the impression that there's the follow through. You're going to be able to handle this. And you definitely want them to see that you have the resources to follow through with the promises that you're making. So when we talk about branding, it might be easier to think of it as like reputation management. How do people perceive you, and how can you make sure that the impression is what you want it to be? And that's why social media is important, keeping everything comprehensive across your website, your social, your different tools, your pitch deck, everything that you have, because it's all part of that reputation. And then with that, I'm going to pass this back to Rob to give you some key takeaways and tie it together.
Yeah, and sorry for the earlier interruption. The key takeaway is simple, and it's about people moving people. You're not going to get random, well, for the most part, you're not going to get random or cold investments. Although we have heard of corporations or foundations contacting clients and or agencies because of discovered synergies. But for the most part, it's work. And it's work by triangulating through people who have access and who have influence in the community and who can really help. And those individuals have to have an affinity toward your work in order to provide that kind of access and those linkages. So that, Jen, is the key takeaway in terms of effective work in the area of foundations and corporations. And the last thing I'll say is, if in fact you develop a relationship and it's a good relationship, be sure to really steward that relationship to the highest extent possible along the lines that they require in terms of paperwork, ROI, reports, etc. So thanks, Jen.
All right, that concludes our presentation for today. Thank you so much, Rob, for an informative presentation. We do have some questions and we've got a few extra minutes. So I'm going to start with the easy question, which is, when will the presentation that is being recorded be sent out to those of us who have attended? And we will be sending this out tomorrow morning. So you can get it then if you want to rewatch it or you missed anything. And there's also the slides if you want to use them for something and download them. Next question, Rob, this is for you. What role does my board have when we are applying for a foundation grant?
Again, it's really depending on the relationship. If in fact there is a board member who has a relationship in that foundation, then they play a very important role in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, shepherding that particular proposal. And then on the stewardship end, if you do get an award, the board, particularly the chairperson of the board, she should play a very important role in terms of making sure that the very best stewardship practices are occurring beyond the executive director. So that's really important from that perspective.
Okay, next question. If we are denied a grant, are there actions we can take to promote our chances in the future?
Absolutely. So the first thing you want to do is understand why you were denied. So you keep the line of communication open as long as they're willing to communicate with you. That being said, once you understand why, in fact, you might have been denied, that'll make you that much better equipped to provide a stronger proposal the following year. And the denial could have occurred for any number of reasons. It could have been that there was stiff competition, that they ran out of funding, and other areas as well. So no, you should never give up, particularly if it's evident and there's proof that the foundation does in fact support your type of 501c3 historically.
So I'll ask a follow-up question to that. Do most foundations, like if you asked them why you were denied, do you think they'd be likely to give you an honest answer? Because I know when you job hunt, a lot of places don't want to give that information because they don't want to invite, I guess, an argument or a disagreement.
Yeah, it's idiosyncratic. Some will definitely tell you. They're very, very open about it. Some not so much. They're very vague. There's a foundation in San Francisco that does capital campaigns, for example, and if you don't make the first cut, you will get the soberest form letter that just says, "Sorry, you're not through to the second round." And it's a little bit daunting, but that's how they operate. And so, no, it's really idiosyncratic. It's all over the map. And but you just have to understand again the nature of the relationship that you singularly have with that foundation.
Right. Okay. Next question. Banks are companies, and I have heard that there is an obligation called CRA. Do you have any additional knowledge on that topic to share?
Right. So that was imposed through federal legislation quite a while back, and it's the Community Reinvestment Act. And in fact, they have to dedicate a certain percentage of their net profits annually to the 501c3 sector. Now, it varies dramatically how each bank operates. The national banks, such as Bank of America, they operate very much on a regional basis, as does Wells Fargo, whereas local banks are much more equipped to make local decisions. But all banks, whether they're a credit union or national bank, are in the program and have reporting requirements, very strict actually, reporting requirements about how they're distributing their funds and if in fact they're meeting that obligation. So it's very good to have those relationships, and banks are certainly generally willing to talk.
Okay, next question. We have limited staff and volunteer time to dedicate to grant writing. how would you suggest we prioritize our foundation applications?
Right. So the methods that we use at Cogea are highly data-driven, which is analyze all of the foundations, try and understand which are the most synergistic in terms of what you're trying to get funded and what they generally fund. And then the priority should be those who give higher grants, should be at the top of the list, given whatever it is you're trying to raise. So it's a very systematic process. It should be very much data-driven, not emotional at all, unless it's a relationship, and really very focused on not you, but the foundation. So you've got to take the subjectivity out. You really have to understand objectively, what do they want for us to be successful in writing this particular proposal, and in making sure that we see it and steward it properly so that we have the highest possibility of success. So unfortunately, regardless of resources, it does take time to do it properly, because you cannot, we highly do not recommend that you literally just apply cold into a foundation. Generally speaking, it's not likely to succeed for the most part.
That makes sense. Next question. Members of our board work for companies, but we are having a hard time getting them to make introductions to these opportunities. Do you have a few suggestions on how to introduce them to their companies?
Sure. Try this. Ask the board member whom they really trust at the highest echelons of decision making, if they're not the one. And also the other quality that they should seek is an individual who might have an affinity, again, who's a decision maker. So guide them in the process. Who do you trust that you can speak to openly? And number two, does that individual, in fact, would they even have an affinity toward our work, right? Because those are the two key factors. And as a board member, it's really not about you. It's about you acting as a board member and saying, look, as a member of the board, I would be remiss not to approach you to see how we might find synergies between this company, which is very strong in terms of community support, and the agency on whose board I sit. So that's the only methodology that'll work. So a little bit more guidance, a little bit more, in other words, knowledge to them about how they can do this. And generally that works very well.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So this is the last one. How do I price corporate sponsorship packages?
Again, there's no answer there. It's highly idiosyncratic. Okay, a few things you need to consider, however. The size of your own operational budget. So what are your requirements? What are you sponsoring? What are you actually selling? What kind of return does that have? So one of the great things about the Rose City Rollers document is that it really demonstrates all of their reach points. I think Jen would agree for the most part. And so they're demonstrating clear value, and then they're offering a whole menu of opportunities. So the question would be, why did they price those at $1,500, $750 to start with, and then the other prices? Well, because they've been in the game long enough now, which is multiple years, that they know what the market can bear. And so that they undoubtedly will have tested other price points, but it really is about what generally gets done, what has been done in the past, and what makes most sense given the level of sponsorship. So unfortunately there's no just candid, there's no standard answer. When we do this for our clients, we do it one-off every single time, which is frustrating, but that's how it has to happen. So that's the answer there.
Not to get off on a wild tangent, but that reminds me of when I was freelancing and trying to determine how to price myself, and everyone said, know your value, know your worth. And it's like, I don't know it without some kind of outside context, That's always a really difficult question.
It is. And the other thing, to your point, that's a good point, would be to do comparables. What else compare, if there is anything else, what comparable is there in the community in terms of demonstrability? So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. Okay, we are out of time. So thank you so much, everyone who came and attended and stayed the extra time. We really appreciate all of you. Like I said, we will be sending our follow-up email tomorrow morning, and that is going to have the recording of this video. If you want to rewatch it, it's going to have links to download the slides, and we'll be sending out future communications about the next webinar. So keep an eye out for those as well. And that's it for today. We hope you learned something today and enjoy the rest of your week.